I'm going to be telling you the 3 most important skills for product designers, especially if you're new or just starting to learn. I'm going to tell you what they are and how you can start applying them to your work today. New designers really need awareness of these skills if they're trying to learn. You need to know these core skills before you can get good at them. My name is Gian. I'm a digital product designer from the Silicon Valley, and I share everything I wish I knew when I first got started learning design with zero experience. That's what this channel is all about. I like to share career tips and teach design to new and aspiring designers who are looking to find their first product design jobs or just improve their skills. So what are the core skills of a product designer? What do they need to know to be good at their jobs? The first skill is pretty underrated, and I suspect it's often neglected, especially new designers, just because it's not something the average person would think of a designer. And that skill is called product strategy, sometimes called product thinking. Basically, this means being good at knowing where your design work fits into the bigger picture of user needs and business needs. Product designers can't just think about making pages or buttons or UI look good. They need to think more broadly and consider the goals of their team, the feature they're working on, the company they work at, and even the market that they're trying to impact. For example, if you were a designer working on designing this page that you're on, this YouTube video player, you wouldn't just be thinking about the design going on this page. You need to think about the bigger system of YouTube, which is things like YouTube Shorts, YouTube Studio, and streaming. If you don't consider the bigger picture, you can make a small change like removing the dislike button and create unintended consequences that affect users and other parts of the platform. This also helps you think about ways to leverage existing systems to make your designs better. For example, Google could put YouTube videos always at the very top of search results if they wanted to, because they have that power, and that comes from the system that YouTube is a part of. So how do you apply this skill to your design work? It's pretty straightforward. You can start by identifying the goals for your business and your users. So on the business side, if you're trying to achieve some sort of goal with your design or with your product, you need to think about what is it you're actually trying to achieve. Do you want more people to sign up for your app? Do you want to get high ratings in the App Store? Do you want to get more sales? Do you want higher NPS? Once you have this figured out, you can adapt your designs to help the business meet the goals. But you also need to balance that with the user's goals, and that's really understanding who they are, what their problems are, and how you might use design to solve for their problem. These 2 points will really inform how you make your smaller design decisions. This is designing for how people interact with the product to help solve their problems. So people using your app or website or designs have goals, and interaction design is basically creating a nice little path between them and their goals. Interaction design, like almost all things in design, start with the user or the person using your thing, right? It starts with their problems, their needs, their motivations. There are also things that most people don't think about, like the physical context of where the user or the person is going to be when they're using your app. Other aspects to consider are their mental state. Are they stressed? Are they relaxed? Are they looking to be entertained? And other things like their technological literacy. How confident and familiar are they with using technology, using websites, using apps, using smartphones, for example? Broadly speaking, you want to design for how this person sees and experiences the world. Once you have this understanding, your goal is to help them solve their problems in the easiest way possible. And that's where you as a designer comes in. So if you're designing according to the user and their context, it's going to look really different. For example, if you're creating a flashcard app, it's going to look really different if you design for medical students versus 8-year-old kids. You would look at things like their technological experience, their familiarity with certain tools, and their general perspective on the world to inform how you design. You need to also design for the context. A tool for a delivery driver might have bigger text, or you use time-sensitive notifications so not to distract the driver when they're delivering something. And those considerations aren't really as important if you're designing an app to be used in an office setting. You also want to structure your UI and your pages in a way that's simple and familiar and logical to your users. And this could be as straightforward as just using really familiar and common design patterns that are in place in popular apps and websites, if it makes sense. Another thing to think about is the interface that you're going to provide for your users. And interface isn't just things that show up on a screen. There can be a touch interface, there can be a voice interface, and maybe there are certain ones that are more appropriate based on the user and the situation. For example, a personal assistant like Alexa, it makes sense for it to be a voice app because of the context where it's used. People who use this are probably really busy and their hands are occupied, so it makes sense to communicate via voice. But if you have a drawing app, it doesn't make sense to make that a voice interface. Can you imagine trying to draw using your voice? That doesn't really make sense. One concept that I think is useful is just thinking about the physical path that a person is on. If you're designing that path, you might want to set up some guardrails so that they don't make any mistakes. You might set up some signs so they know where they're going, and really make it as straightforward as possible for them to reach their destination, which is solving their problem or achieving a certain goal. Last point for interaction design is actually visual design. So what you show to a user can really affect their perception on how something can be interacted with. Your choice of UI might communicate a certain type of behavior and might communicate a certain way that they might interact with your product. For example, a big red button it's very clear you're supposed to interact with a big red button, but maybe it's less clear you can interact and drag some editable text. The choice of UI will affect how your product is perceived, and that perception will ultimately affect how it's interacted with. The third skill is visual design, the one everyone loves. This includes things like typography, color, hierarchy, layout, structure, organization of elements on the page, and really a major part of visual design is just making things that look visually pleasing, because who doesn't love a good looking thing, right? There are basic things a designer needs to know, like how to space things correctly, how to align things in a visually pleasing way, maybe using a grid, using colors that harmonize well and align with a certain brand style, and good use of typography to communicate. You can learn these sorts of things, basically how to create visually pleasing things, just by studying graphic design principles, which is kind of its own field, but also very closely linked to product design, especially when visuals are in play. And this is something I'll cover more in depth in a future video. So that's pretty straightforward, but visual design isn't just making things look good, it's really a way to communicate to a user. Visuals are a way to get people to understand your design very quickly just by looking at it. A good way to think about visuals is a way to communicate to your users. You can use hierarchy to show what's most important. You can use certain UI elements to suggest how they're supposed to use your product without even using any instructions. Color can be used for branding, but also to hammer home certain points. You can use spacing, grouping, and placement of UI elements to communicate things that belong in a group or don't belong in a group. All these things can combine to form an impression for the person that views your screen or your app. And that impression can be bad if the visual design is poor, so it's important to get it right. As a product designer, you should be able to create screens that look good, as well as communicate clearly to the user whatever it is you're trying to communicate to them. Studying graphic design principles and the topics that I explained earlier are a great start in doing that. And I want to do a video on this on the future too, because it's a really fun topic. As you can tell, these skills are all very closely related and they overlap in a lot of different ways. Knowing what these are, which if you're watching this, now you do, is a really great first step in identifying good resources that you can use, as well as a great way to know what to focus your efforts on, especially if you're new or you're just starting out. Focus on these 3 topics, and I swear you'll go a long way. Just like the other videos on my channel, I'm just sharing everything I wish I knew when I first got started learning product design. I taught it to myself and learned just online through videos like this, and I don't want you to have to suffer in the way that I did, which is why this channel exists. I'm sharing all the tips and tricks that I can give for new and aspiring designers. Here's a list of some upcoming videos that I'm working on right now, and you should check out this video where I talk about what it is a product designer actually does in their job. See you in the next one.